Yes. Yes, look at the page numbers that it tells you. Somebody need a notebook that wasn't here last week?
We don't have a notebook.
Just a moment. Somebody.
I do have the book of,
This goes from the back.
first one.
Yes, this is a continuation of your first one. And it should go after the,
Yeah. I do have the book of Daniel, I just don't have the book right now.
okay. Don't be religious about it, that's before. Turn it on when you're ready.
There might be somebody besides me that wants to put their phone on mute.
Okay. And I hear the bounce from the wall. The microphone is on. So all is well so far. Okay. Anybody here that wasn't here last week? You weren't. Did you get a notebook?
No, I didn't get one.
Well, guess what I've got for you? Who else needs a notebook? I see you've got it.
We can share.
Well, I brought extras now as one for each if you want. Ça va?
Did you say each of us could have one?
Yes. Who else needs a notebook?
You need one, Peggy? Yes, you said, oh, that's it. Yeah, okay.
Well, she asked first. Oh, you've got one, okay.
You did that side, okay, thank you.
Everybody has one that wants one? You're all set? Now I need one for me.
You need a lesson for today's portion.
Did they?
Here's our folder with today's lesson.
Yeah.
I just picked it up.
So you're giving it back to me, okay? Tonight, we're going to get into the thick of Daniel's life. And there are a lot of things to know about who he is, what he was doing, his role. There is nothing in the book of Daniel that is trivia. Every line, every word has significance. Okay. Are we ready to begin? Any special prayer needs we need to remember tonight? Did you get?
Yes,
Did you
got
get? You got one?
Yes.
Okay, good. Good. It's all right. Special prayer needs?
Appreciate prayers for our daughter Denise,
Denise.
still paralyzed.
Okay.
I'm praying for her. I know you are, and I appreciate it.
Oh, okay. Now we've met Erica, right?
Yes.
Okay. Trying to picture her. It'll come to me in a minute. I have a photographic memory, but I don't do well with names. Sometimes the lens is foggy, but
I have a request again. The housing is not settled yet, so we have people working on it this evening and tomorrow.
okay. Housing. Denise,
For Maria, she's still not feeling good.
Maria, and Erica. Okay, let's divide up into pairs, 2 people, 3, and let's remember these requests. Oh, you can. I'll join this fellow back here. For the sake of those that weren't here last time, I'm doing show and tell again. Who wasn't here last time? Yeah, you. What I have here are some actual replicas of things from the time of Daniel. For example, this little thing that looks like a chunk of fudge, I call it my Babylonian fudge bar, but don't try to bite it, it's clay. This is Nebuchadnezzar's chronicle. In here, he outlines the details of his life, year by year, all 66 years that he was king of Babylon. It begins with his battle of Carchemish, in which he soundly defeated the Egyptian Pharaoh Necho, chased them down through Palestine, stopped off in Jerusalem and told King Jehoiakim, who was there at the time, king at the time, that there was a new sheriff in town. It was Nebuchadnezzar. And he took hostages. And that chronicles the moment when Daniel and his 3 friends were taken as hostages to Babylon. It's on there. And it is secular evidence for the reality of the biblical story. Then we have this one. Pass that one back. This is called a Nabonidus cylinder. He had a bunch of these, but I'm sharing this with you because that's vitally important. In there, Nabonidus mentions his, I'm glad to see you, I got a notebook for you. Yay! Whoopie-doo. I'm glad you made it. I'm sharing some of the things I passed around last time. You may have seen this last week.
No, I got here late, I didn't see it.
Okay.
Okay, coming back.
It'll come back eventually. This one is vitally important. This one has to do with Daniel chapter 5. This is called the Cyrus cylinder. In here, Cyrus the Great talks about how he conquered Babylon, what he did, and Daniel was there. This verifies the details of Daniel chapter 5. And that other roll that you take this, that's going around, Belshazzar, king of Babylon, was never mentioned outside of the biblical material, such that scholars believe that he was just a made-up name. The last king of Babylon was Nabonidus, whose cylinder I passed around here just now. There it is. But Nabonidus left Babylon. He hated being king. So he set up a little way station in the wilderness, in the oasis of Tema in Saudi Arabia, and started charging tolls for all the caravans that went through. And he left his firstborn, only born son in charge, Belshazzar. And on that cylinder, there it is, it's a prayer of Nabonidus asking the gods to watch over his son Belshazzar. And that was dug out of the ground under one of the many temples that Nabonidus had played a role in rebuilding in Babylon. Here's the Babylonian Chronicle. Doesn't look like much, does it? But it has the story of Nebuchadnezzar conquering Pharaoh Necho when he takes hostage Daniel and his friends hostage. Here's the Nabonidus cylinder that mentions Belshazzar.
On the notebook, the one lady that came in.
Okay,
That's page 18.
it's got it. It's hers. Okay. I saw you just a little while ago. You were in Office Depot. That's where I was trying to get these printed out really quickly. Yeah, I was very busy, in a hurry. My printer was failing. I finally bought a new one. Anyway, life should get easier. But what I'm pointing out to you with these artifacts is that the story in Daniel, from chapter 1 all the way to the end, is verified historically outside of the Bible. And we're going to get into studying that tonight. We're going to get right into it. So turn to page 7 that's been handed out to you tonight. Do you know what the difference between an apocalypse and an apocrypha is? Apocrypha is hidden. And apocalypse is what? Revealed. So when we talk about the apocalypse, the revelation of Jesus Christ, what is the book about? Jesus being revealed. It's not a revelation of the country of Iran or Bibi Netanyahu or Donald Trump. It's not the revelation of those guys. They may play a role in the history, but the primary function of the book of Revelation is to reveal to us the person and work of Jesus Christ at the right hand of God. You think about the Gospels, you got Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they tell us what Jesus did so that we'll know who Jesus was. John starts right out with who Jesus was, so we'll understand what Jesus did. Then the book of Acts tells us the story of the impact of who Jesus is, what he did, what he was now doing, what he shall do on the beginning of the Christian church. And the focus is all about Jesus. And there are 9 sermons recorded in there. If you want to know what the apostles preached, go to the book of Acts. It's all right there. And it's all about Jesus. Then you have the apostle Paul and James and Jude and Peter. They wrote epistles about life as Christians, but they wrote mostly about the meaning of Jesus Christ. What happened to you personally when the Word became flesh and dwelt among us? Things happened to you, and you were not aware of it until it was revealed to you, which is something that I am called to do as a pastor, a preacher of the gospel. And unfortunately, there are a lot of us that don't preach much gospel. But then people come to me and says, how come you don't preach the old waymarks? Well, I do. I preach them in the light of the one who matters most, Jesus Christ. You may know all the details of the millennium, when it starts, how it happens, what we're going to do. And if you don't know Jesus Christ, that knowledge is not going to do any good for you. You're going to die with it. So, in my understanding, Jesus is first, primary, foremost. And all the doctrines point to him and are drawn from him. And when we see Jesus as the heart, the center of our lives and of our doctrines, all of our 28 fundamental beliefs as Seventh-day Adventists is directly related to the person and work of Jesus Christ. All 28 of them. Unfortunately, it's not emphasized like that. When I wrote the Bible Doctrines textbook for our academies several years ago, that's the approach I took. It was entitled, We Would See Jesus. And all 28 of our fundamental beliefs over 13 weeks was all drawn from the person and work of Jesus Christ. And after the General Conference got done with it, all of my stuff was there, but they went back to the doctrines first, and Jesus kind of stuck in. We had a long conference call, and I begged and pleaded for them not to mess that up. But they said, okay, Jim, we paid you, you're done, goodbye. So, all my things are there, everything I wrote is there, but it's doctrinal focused rather than Christ focused. That's my complaint. I bought the rights to my book. I use it in my evangelism now. But it takes us to the book of Revelation. What is Jesus doing now? In the Gospels, his life, death, resurrection, ascension. His impact, the book of Acts. His meaning to us through the epistles. But what is he doing now at the right hand of God? The book of Hebrews and the book of Revelation tells us. So the book of Revelation is the apocalypse. It is the revelation of the person and work of Jesus Christ as King of Kings, Lord of Lords. And because we have the book of Revelation, we know how the whole story ends. And it's his story throughout. Every bit of it. Anything else is secondary. So we're going to discover that when we get done with Daniel. But we're going to study bits and pieces of Revelation tonight that are vital. Now, as you look at the first verse of the book of Daniel, you have it on your first page, page 7 there. Take a look at it. Let's read this together. Read with it out loud with me. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and laid siege to it. The Lord delivered King Jehoiakim of Judah into his power, together with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar to the house of his God. He deposited the vessels in the treasury of his God. Now let's pause. Excuse me? What? Oh, did you notice the word Tanakh up there at the top? Does anybody know what the Tanakh is? No? Well, depends on who you're talking to. Bingo! It's the Jewish Old Testament. Their name for their scriptures is Tanakh. Yes, you are reading an English translation, a Jewish translation of the Jewish book of Daniel. And I think you'll find it amazing. They did an excellent job. Their translation of the Old Testament, their translation of the Psalms, especially the Psalms, is absolutely incredible. I read Hebrew, I read Aramaic, the languages that are Daniel is written in. And the book of Psalms, it has rhythm and rhyme, and most of our translations miss all of that. But the Jewish translators struggled and worked, and they made it happen. When you read the book of Psalms in the Tanakh, you will have a whole new view of the worship times of the ancient sanctuary. But now, here we are, the Tanakh. It's Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketubim. Torah, the 5 books of Moses. Then you have the Nevi'im. Those are the prophets, and that includes Joshua and Judges, and all the way to Malachi. But then you have the Ketubim. These are the writings, that's Psalms, Job, and Ruth, and Song of Solomon, Lamentations, and Daniel. Why Daniel's included in Ketubim, I've never found out. But that's the way it works out, because I consider him a prophet. But they have him in the writings. And that's the threefold division of the Jewish Bible. Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketubim. Torah, Moses. Nevi'im, prophets, Elijah. And Ketubim, the writings. All having to do with the temple. Any questions on that? Now, why is it important? I'm going to come back to the Nevi'im in a moment, but it's rather significant. We have a major problem with that first verse. Do you know what that problem is? skeptics have pointed this out. Daniel doesn't know what he's talking about because he's got the date wrong. He says it's in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim. But if you read Jeremiah, the events described happened in the 4th year of Jehoiakim. Anybody have a solution? You already read it? Yes. Good. Bless you. Absolutely. There's a problem with the way we date things. For us, the year begins in January 1st. Happy New Year. We have New Year's Eve at the end of December 31st. Yeah. So our year runs from midwinter to midwinter. But the Babylonian year ran from spring to spring. So it's 3 months. It's 3 months out of phase from our year. But then you get to Jeremiah, the Jews, they measured the year from Tishri to Tishri, which is from the fall to fall. So it's 6 months out of phase. Once you know that, it begins to make sense that Daniel knew what he was talking about. Next thing is that they had 2 systems of chronology. And this is very important. A teacher I had years ago, Edwin R. Thiele, spent his life solving the problem, the riddle of the kings, 1st and 2nd Kings. We must have a loose connection. Which one is it? The one between my ears? I don't know. What? Yeah, okay. I was just hearing those pops. Yeah. Well, we'll see if it gets any better. The chronological system, Dr. Thiele figured this out. And it's published, The Mysterious Numbers of the Hebrew Kings. It is the standard reference book now for all scholars who are studying the Old Testament. What he did is he solved the major problem, which was that there were 2 systems of chronology. And somebody just came in. This is the next segment for tonight. So, in the Babylonian system, when the king ascends to the throne, that's not his first year. It's year 0. It's his accession year. It's when he arose to the throne. In 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar trounced the Egyptians, chased them through Palestine. The Egyptians literally shed their weapons, jumped out of their chariots, and ran pell-mell from Carchemish back to Egypt, with Nebuchadnezzar and his soldiers in hot pursuit. Nebuchadnezzar was not yet the king. His dad was, Nabopolassar. But as Nebuchadnezzar stopped by Jerusalem, he said, there's a new sheriff in town, new king. You used to be under Pharaoh Necho. You are now under me. Had a new treaty all set up, suzerainty treaty, which we will talk about as we go through Daniel, which plays a major role in understanding it. Signed it, and Jehoiakim said, all that you have commanded, we will do. And part of the commandment was treaty, you have booty. Nebuchadnezzar had to pay his soldiers, so he stripped the gold and stuff from the temple to pay his soldiers, and then took those vessels from the temple, took them back to Babylon, and took hostages. How old do you think Daniel would have been when he was sent off to Babylon? He was an early teen. Early teen, probably no more than 13, 14 at the most. That's the way it was done back then. He was a kid, as were his three friends. They were kids. So, this happened in 605. But if you look in this figure 2 in your book, the notes that you have, it's on page 10. You see an outline here, a diagram of how this works out. Jehoiakim's first year, according to Jeremiah, or third year, I should say, would have been in 606, our year, BC. In Daniel's year in Babylon, that would have begun in springtime. Jeremiah's year, his third year is already over and past by the time mid-year comes. So the Jeremiah year has it in the fall, and that's the beginning of Jehoiakim's fourth year. Notice that the fourth year, according to Jeremiah, overlaps by several months Daniel's year.
What page?
Page 10.
Page what?
10. 10. 10. Yes. 10. Now, Nebuchadnezzar trounced Pharaoh Necho in the winter of 605. Then he heard that his father was ill. So he hightailed it across the desert. From Egypt, went straight across the desert. He didn't go up through the Fertile Crescent and across. He trounced, he tread, he ran. He wanted to grab the throne before somebody else did. And he left Daniel and his friends in the care of his agents who carried them to Babylon while Nebuchadnezzar was dashing to get there. So Nebuchadnezzar got to Babylon in time for him to ascend to the throne in September. But remember, the Babylonian year is spring to spring. So for Nebuchadnezzar, his accession year is year 0. His first year doesn't begin until the next spring. So that shoves everything out of phase with each other, doesn't it? So Daniel got it right. He said it was the third year of Jehoiakim. He was in Babylon. He was using Babylonian calendar. And that's evidence that he was really a historical figure. Right there in verse 1, we have evidence that Daniel was a real person in Babylon at the time. Because in the 2nd century BC, during the times of the Maccabees, all of this stuff had been forgotten. And it raises an issue. In Daniel chapter 9, Daniel quotes Jeremiah. Daniel had Jeremiah's writings in front of him. He would have known that Jeremiah said 4th year. If he was writing in the 2nd century, why didn't he use Jeremiah's reckoning? Well, the answer is very simple, because he wasn't a 2nd century person. He was a 5th, 6th century person. So right there in verse 1, in that tidbit of trivia, we start right off with evidence of the reality of the person Daniel. Did you all follow me on that? Does it make sense? I love that quotation from Eichroth. You'll see it in a little bit. He and Dr. Pfeiffer, two German theologians, biblical scholars, both of them said in two different ways, we may never know how the second century author of Daniel knew these things. Well, duh. Pardon my contempt there, but I meant it. Come on, guys, look at the evidence. I have a PhD in apologetics, and my approach is evidential. I have evidence for everything I believe and can back it up with thus saith everything. And that's what you're getting the benefit of tonight. Now, moving on. The education. Let's move on. He deposited the vessels in the treasury of his God. We're on page 11. There's Walter Eichrodt. We may never know how the second century author of the book of Daniel knew these things. That's under letter F. We know that Nebuchadnezzar deposited those sacred treasures in his treasury, and it was still there in Daniel chapter 5, because Belshazzar hauled the stuff out and started offering sacrifices and oblations and so on to the Babylonian gods with them. Now, I want you to turn to page 12. I got some cartoons from ancient Babylon here. Nebuchadnezzar's name in Akkadian is Nabu Kuduri Usur. Nabu Kuduri Usur, which means basically, Nabu, guard my borders. Or another translation, Nabu, guard my son. Who is Nabu? You're all dying to know this, I know. But it plays a role in the book of Revelation. So we're going to jump through several hundred years here bracketing this. Nabu is the god of writing and prophecy in Babylon. Nabu is the god. Yeah. So look at that left-hand picture. How many horns does that bust of Nabu have? Two. So the god of prophecy in Babylon has two horns. Okay. Now, the middle picture is of a Babylonian boundary stone. Wherever they conquered territory, Nebuchadnezzar and his crew would deposit a block of rock there, all nicely carved with all the gods of Babylon, and writings on all sides with curses. They have a serpent circling the outside of the boundary stone, a snake. And there's meaning for that for another time. But they have the gods. And in the third frieze, the third panel of those boundary stones, there are three key gods. You have Shamash, Sin, and Nabu. Guess what the icon on their boundary stones looks like for Nabu? It's right there in the right-hand picture. Tell me what you see. What do you see? It's a ram. How many horns does he have? Horned ram, you got it. Now, in the book of Revelation, do we know anybody who's called a false prophet, who looks like the lamb, but he has two horns? Where do we find this critter? Revelation 13, starting at verse 11. Revelation 13 is making direct reference and interpretation of Daniel. And if you don't get that, you'll misinterpret it. For example, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, which we're going to study next week. Big image. And he's the head of gold. Then the next story. Remember, Daniel is a unit. It is not separate stories typed together. There's transition. Nebuchadnezzar praises God for the revelation of he's only the head. But he solves it in the plain of Dura. He sets up an image, all of gold. And it's him, with all due humility. So he just sets up an image to the image. But the image is defined in Daniel chapter 7 with 4 beasts. So what John in the book of Revelation did is he combined Daniel 2, Daniel 3, where Nebuchadnezzar sets up his image, Daniel 7. The 4 beasts are now combined into one beast. And then you have this 2-horned beast that looks like who? Who does the 2-horned beast look like in the book of Revelation? He looks like a lamb. Who's the lamb in the book of Revelation? Jesus. So he is an imposter. We'll get into this in more detail in a couple of weeks. But he's an imposter personating the lamb.
Imposter, impersonating a lamb.
Ta-da! Yes. And through the rest of the book of Revelation, it's always the dragon, the beast, and who? False prophet. Nabu. Are you confused? You understand we're hitting on something of vital importance in these last days. Yeah. But I'll let you ponder that for a bit. Yes, ma'am. Yes. John and Revelation, Jesus has combined Daniel 2, Daniel 3, and Daniel 7 into one picture in chapter 13. And what you have there is somebody like Nebuchadnezzar setting up an image to the image, which is 4 beasts combined into one. Yeah, your mind is way ahead of mine all of a sudden. Are combined into one. When we get to Daniel 7, I'll have it lined out in a chart. You can see what John is doing with Daniel. Yeah. Yes.
Are you entertaining quick questions, or you want?
Yes, I am. I'm entertaining whatever.
Okay.
I'm trying to be as entertaining as possible.
I have a logical problem with Nebuchadnezzar turning to Daniel and saying, "Wow, you're right. Your God is the right one." And then he turns around and makes an image of himself and says, "Worship me or I'll kill you." And I have a little,
What does that tell you about King Nebi?
maybe wasn't wired right.
He had to go and graze with the gazelles for 7 periods before he got his sanity, which is the next chapter. It's a unit. It all flows.
Puts together like a puzzle.
Yes.
Comes together.
Yes. It's not separate stories. It's a continuation.
It's a continuation which all comes together as one.
You need to be a theologian. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Phil. He is now a theologian, a Bible scholar. Yes, Phil, you've got it right. And Revelation is a commentary on the book of Daniel, and Zechariah, and Ezekiel, and Amos, and Jeremiah. What John did, what Jesus did, the author of Revelation, is he collected all of the messianic references from Old Testament Judaism and gathered them together and wove them into the tapestry that is the book of Revelation. And if you don't bring the stories to the book, you will never understand it. Or you'll think you do, and you're way off base, making false prophecies, predictions of how things will end. Like Harold Camping. I mentioned him because he's dead. He can't sue me now. But he was the founder of Family Life Radio, and he was constantly picking dates based on his calculations, based on a total dismissal of the Old Testament roots of the book of Daniel and Revelation, constantly picking dates for the rapture. Finally, he was including the Aztec calendar from Mexico. His last prediction was December 12th, 2021. Poor fellow, he died before that. He never knew that we're still here. I wrote to him once. I mean, us Adventists, we learned our lesson in 1844, didn't we? Didn't we? Don't set dates. No man knows the hour, knows the day, nor the hour. Yeah. Nor the time, yep, the hour. So I wrote to him and says, you really need to learn a lesson from us. I don't know if he ever read it or not. Apparently he didn't because he kept on doing it afterwards. But well, he was so sure of himself, which is the biggest problem, and it's my problem as well. I'm so certain of things that sometimes I find myself closing my mind to surprising possibilities. And the Lord, in his infinite mercy, usually bangs me on the side of the head by the Holy Spirit, grabs my attention. I can go back over my 50 plus years of ministry and I can point out places where he actually did that. Things that I preached up to that point I will never preach again because I realized good stuff there, James, but still, like that opening paragraph on the cover of your notebook, we never stop learning. There's always more.
To learn. You never stop learning, there's always more to learn.
That's right. And I've discovered in my studies of Daniel and Revelation that from my perspective, we're just barely scratching the surface. It's like an iceberg. You got the 1%, 10% above the waves, but underneath are these layers of ice. That's the way the Bible is. It's very compact. What we see has a whole batch of layers underneath, which when you take the totality of Scripture, you begin to see the whole iceberg instead of the little smidgen on the top. So that's a shape of things to come in this course. I want to go to Daniel's diet. The king allotted a daily. Did you notice there that Daniel and his three friends were from the royal household? They were Jehoiakim's family. Did you know that? It's right there. They were royalty. And that partially explains why Nebuchadnezzar treated them the way he did. They weren't just peasants. They were among the hoi polloi that Nebuchadnezzar catered to. And so they became leaders in Babylon's court. and they got a 3-year education. The university, King Nebi's University. I call him King Nebi for short. His university was a 3-year program. In Daniel chapter 2, Daniel has just graduated. And his first task was to come up with Nebi's dream. It all flows. All right, I want to get into their diet. He would not defile himself. On page 16, there's a clay tablet pictured there. Here's a black and white picture of it. But that's a recipe tablet. There are 25 recipes on it, plus sauces, plus spices, plus. Yeah. It's the oldest recipe book that has ever been found. And it's from Babylon. Let me introduce you to this book. This is Jeanne Bottero, French lady, fantastic scholar. She collected recipes from Babylon. Texte culinaire mésopotamien. Mesopotamia culinary texts. This book contains all kinds of recipes from Babylon. You want to know what it was that Daniel wouldn't eat? I got a sample recipe in the book there. Tell me what you think of it. Did I hear a yuck? Ucky, ucky, ucky. It's called red stew. Can you imagine why it's red? What? Blood. Yeah. So before you put in the meat, you have boiling water. You stir in rendered fat and the intestines and or belly. I think that refers to bacon of some sort. Sprinkle in the grains, ground nuts, onions, samidu, we don't know what that is, cumin, coriander, leeks, and crushed garlic. All of the recipes, by the way, have leeks and garlic and onion. They love the flavor of those things. What? I heard talking what?
Garlic and onion is very healthy.
Yes, unless it's mixed with blood. After marinating your meat in the remainder of the blood, you dump it all in and stir it. So, what's the primary problem that Daniel faced here? Yeah, God had some very strong things to say about the meaning of blood. Don't eat it. Period. When you go to a kosher deli, guess what? If they do it kosher approach, there's no blood in that meat. That's why if you're going to eat meat, go kosher. That's it. So here's Daniel. By the way, the Akkadian word that's translated into Hebrew for meats actually refers to things like candy bars and sweets and so on. So you understand that that high fat, high carbohydrate, bloody diet was guaranteed to do what to a teenager boy, a teenage boy? Zits. And he's got to be pure. He's got to stand before Nebuchadnezzar and his graduation blemish-free. So Daniel was smart. He was brilliant. I'm going to stick to lentils and chickpeas and water. Because the wine, who knows where it's been. Yeah, really, falafel. I have no doubt that falafels were available back then. It's a very ancient recipe, falafel. Does everybody know what falafel is?
It's the ground up chickpeas and you mix it with spices and it's like a little ball.
Yeah, or you make it flat to fit inside a pita. I love pita and falafel with olives and tomato and, oh man,
You have to go to Crossroads Deli, they make good.
I know. Yep. So, we've gone for an hour tonight. Do you have any questions? What do you think of what you've learned so far?
I thought that the meat that Daniel, or the king's meat that Daniel refused to eat, it was because it was offered to sacrifice. I didn't realize.
That too.
Okay.
All meals were offered to Marduk and Sin, Enki, and Nabu. So yes, that's a problem. But it's a bloody meal,
Okay.
and certainly not kosher. Daniel was a good Jewish boy. Stood up for his kosherness in the middle of Nebuchadnezzar's court, and came out on top because of it. He and his friends. By the way, did you know his 3 friends are mentioned in Nebuchadnezzar's tablets? By name, and what their responsibilities were. The third one, Abednego, was the assistant for the crown prince. The middle one was in charge of the slave girls. And the other one was in charge of merchant accounting. But that detail about being in charge of the slave girls gives us a clue about something else that happened to Daniel and his 3 friends. In order to work safely in the king's court, they were castrated. They were eunuchs. We know that from Nebuchadnezzar's own tablets. Okay, you ready to learn some more?
What is so amazing when I read your notes about the 10 days that, it seems like such a short period of time to see a marked difference.
Well, you remember he was a good Jewish boy when he was made a hostage. He'd been living kosher life in the king's court, Jehoiakim's court. So it was just a continuation.
Outdistanced them.
Yeah. Keep in mind that the story, you got the little bit and you got all the layers. And you fill in the layers with the knowledge of the culture and the times and the rest of the Old Testament. All of it figures into,
All together comes to one.
it all comes together. Yes. Yeah. You're enjoying this, aren't you?
Yes,
Thank you.
very much.
Anybody else enjoying this?
Another quick question.
Another quick question?
I want to have it straight in my head. Did you say that the 3 friends of Daniel were eunuchs?
Yes,
Or that Daniel was a eunuch?
probably.
Okay, I wasn't,
That would also explain one reason why he didn't go back to Jerusalem. That's another layer of the iceberg.
I got the next question for next week.
And you don't even have the notes yet. How can you ask a question about next week?
I read the first 7 chapters of Daniel.
Oh, you read. Oh, good for
So I
you.
have some idea what you're talking about.
You're reaching the point where I don't need to teach this. You can all teach yourselves. All right, then. It's after 7 o'clock, and I've promised to keep it within the hour. as much as possible. I could go on and on about some of these things, but you have the notes. Okay.
Daniel and his friends, they weren't brothers, they were just,
They're probably cousins. They were members of the same household. They were part of the king's household. And there would be the king, and he's got brothers, cousins, aunts, uncles, into this. So they were royalty. Okay, any other questions? One? Speak up for me, I'm going deaf.
Takes a lot of faith, and then you wonder in these times for those two guys to stand up in a rural stand.
Yeah, when they're outstanding in the field?
To say, well, you're not going to eat of the king's.
Even if he burns us up, we're still not going to bow to your dumb idol.
That's why it takes a lot of courage to stand up for what you believe in.
Yes, yes. And these four certainly had it.
Mary, you brought it up.
I did.
I'm curious, why were the three others thrown into the furnace and not Daniel?
Because Daniel wasn't there.
Not only that, he interpreted the dream, so he was higher up.
He was higher up, you got it. Okay. Well, it's now 10 after 7, and thank you for your generosity in allowing this to go on.
You want us to read something from Daniel?
Yeah, read the book, memorize the book. Look at it in several versions. Don't be stuck in the King James Version. They did an excellent job. But we've learned a lot about things since 1611.
So you'll discuss chapter 2 next week?
Yep, next week is chapter 2. You all come back now, you hear? Take a picture of my book? Oh, yes, you may. Sure. All right, let's close with a moment of prayer, shall we? Father, all glory, honor, dominion, and power belong to you. Jesus, you are truly worthy, for you were slain and you've redeemed us by your blood. You've made us kings and priests, and you've called us to reign upon the earth, not as despots, but as saviors. Thank you, Holy Spirit, for preserving all of these things for us. Not only just the word, but also the artifacts that we find with our dustpans and shovels and brooms. Thank you for all of this. We love you. We praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. So you all come back now, you hear?